Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Steve-O here. Today we're going to talk about portfolios. Um, Today, we're shooting in the office. I'm not going to be able to do a lot of outdoor work. I've recently had a procedure done on my leg. I had a fasciotomy to relieve some of my compartments because of military and stuff like that. But let's get into it. So, what is a portfolio? A portfolio is a way that you can show your artwork in a book, and it could be a good coffee table, you can sell it. There's a lot of things you can do when it comes to a portfolio. Now, when we're talking portfolios, what we need to talk about first, and this is most important, is what is cohesion, right? What is cohesion? Specifically when it comes to a portfolio. And plainly put, cohesion means photographs that are in a group that stick together, right? So having a cohesive of body work has a sense of unity and wholeness to it. And these images are going to appear to be created one by one mind and one artist, right? So when someone says a portfolio has a signature style, what they mean is they're talking about cohesion. Now, how do we create cohesion? Well, cohesion is created by repetition, right? The elements begin to repeat themselves in a number of things. So cohesion can be color and light relationship. It could be quality of light. It can be, movement, shape, focus, framing strategy, mood, and a figure or a group, right? It sounds simple, but there's a catch. In highly cohesive projects, the photograph or the photographer is repeating multiple elements from image to image without the work seeming formulated, right? It's well representative, and I'll post some examples in the link so that way you can go check it out. So why is cohesion important? Well, cohesion is based on the idea that your work on a photographic project, not creating an individual one-off image, for students and other photographers, this is relatively a new idea. So let's talk about why it's important and why you should embrace this. A project format is going to allow you to introduce a visual or a narrative theme and then riff off of that, right? This is the same with, what unifies your work and what makes it interesting to look at, right? It's not just a beautiful picture, it's the vehicle for you to actually say something within your work. And without it, your portfolio would be, akin to a shoebox of random photos, right? What's the difference? And so a good way to think of it is one image is an idea and a body work is a way of thinking. So let's take a step outside of photography and let's see if this will help. It might be easier to understand the importance of cohesion if we take a step out of that medium. For example, let's consider cohesion within music, right? Imagine you bought an album from iTunes or Apple, Spotify, CD, whatever, right? Every track has a different style. The first track was, ragged. The second track was, British Envision pop. And the third was country. And the fourth was punk. And the fifth was gangster rap, and so forth and so on, right? How could you categorize the artist who made the album? You really couldn't, right? Because they're doing so many different things. Electronic would be a possible term, or a mess would be another, right? But the artist would really have no identity of style. And that's the whole idea of cohesion, is we're trying to identify your style within your portfolio, which allows you to then become a better artist. So with cohesion, in photography, lacking in an identifiable style, specifically with photography, that is a huge career killer. I know some really good photographers out there who can do great photos, but just because you can take a good photo doesn't mean you can put together a portfolio if you don't have cohesion, right? And so let's, use commercial photography, for example. In commercial photography within the market, photographers are hired based on whether their style matches a given need. For example, let's say, Rolling Stone magazines needs an edgy constructed portrait of Lady Gaga, right? They're not going to go to a photo editor and an art director, right? They'll probably go to them to actually search for photographers, but when they're looking for photographers, right, they're looking for people who have experience in editorial portraiture, especially with celebrities, right? So if you've never worked with a celebrity, why would they hire you, right? They're going to have an edgy feel to their portfolio, and they're going to construct their portraits with a direct pose, studio like props, and so forth. They're not going to hire a photographer who creates mellow, natural light portraits, and they're certainly not going to hire a photographer who works in another genre. For example, like me, I work in landscape. Why would they hire me to do that, right? Such as a still life or a landscape. So they're looking for specialists, not just portraiters, but in a certain style of portraiture. And these editors have a niche they need, and they're looking for niche photographers to fill that specific niche. Niche role is going to be the exact same thing. It's more about the identity of their work, right? So if your portfolio matches what they're looking for, you might get considered for the job. If not, you won't. Now remember, that's okay. Your portfolio is not there to please everyone, just a select substance to the market. And this is a key point. Don't try to show the breadth of your abilities in one portfolio, because you can't show powers in every type of photograph: still life, portrait, landscape, documentary, digital, and so forth. You need to pick a specific type of genre and master that specific type of genre. One of my favorite quotes is, "You don't become a blacksmith overnight," right? They spend tens of hundreds of thousands of hours beating at their craft to then become perfect. Think kind of, when specialization wasn't always the case, go back 30, 50 years, and you'll find many photographers who earned a living as generalists, and they could do this by advertising photographs one day, annual report photography another day, and then wedding photography is on the weekends. And if you go to a flea market, you can find some old dusty photography textbook that advocates this kind of shooting. But this type of business model is mostly extinct, especially with large to medium markets that we have in today's time. When it comes to your portfolio, the first thing we want is cohesion. Now, we've talked about what cohesion is. We discussed why it is important for your portfolio, and I'm going to put some links in the description so you can look at some projects. But this is the first step when it comes to building a portfolio. And as we go through this series, it's going to be a lot of fun, because our next thing that we're going to be talking about after our, cohesion, is we're going to be talking about more in depth. So cohesion and a concept. How do you articulate a subject matter, right? And we're going to talk about, different type of themes when it comes to commercial, documentary, or fine art, because that is very, very important, is to understand, these type of themes, right? What is in the portfolio? What is it that you're trying, to convey within your artwork? Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm excited to go down this path with you, and I'll see you next week when we continue talking more about portfolio.